It is our pleasure to be joined by a man that is the college football insider for the Action Network. He also happens to be an Oklahoma State alum, but that's fine. It's fine. He is Brett McMurphy. Brett, what's going on, man?
My sister's an OU grad, so if we can continue the conversation by giving that info, I'd love it.
That is
perfect.
Yeah, that's important information that we definitely needed to know. Okay, you've been following this for a long time, but after lots and lots of meetings between the leaders in college football, the college football playoff is not expanding, or at least not expanding until 2026. And I guess my question to start things off, Brett, is why not?
Let's see. 11 responsible adults could not come to a conclusion that all 11 responsible adults believe is the right thing to do, and that is expand the playoffs. And there are various reasons for that. Part of that is because the SEC expanding. Part of that is you have new commissioners. But it basically boils down to, they have become divided. The 11 folks I'm talking about, the 10 commissioners plus Notre Dame AD Jack Swarbrick. In the past, when there were disagreements between the commissioners, going back when Jim Delaney and Mike Slive were head of the Big Ten and the SEC, they would work things out. Everybody wouldn't get what they wanted, but ultimately they would come to a conclusion that would be, for the most part, in the best interest of college football. We're at a point now where everybody, and I understand why, they're doing what's best for their conference. If you're commissioner of the MAC, you're doing what's best for the MAC. If you're commissioner of the SEC or the Big 12, you're doing what's best for those conferences. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what the president hired you to do. However, regarding the college football playoff, I'd say that, 90%, 95%, maybe that's low, people involved in college athletics believe the playoff should be expanded. We can debate whether it should be 8, 12. Heck, Mike Leach wants 64 teams, maybe one day. With that being said, they can't come to an agreement on how to do that. And now we have to wait another 4 years with this 14 playoff to finish out. And then there's no guarantee they're going to come to an agreement when that contract expires on what the new playoff would look like. So I may have went a little bit longer than you wanted, but it's to make it as simple as possible. 11 very smart people cannot come to an agreement on something that everybody agrees needs to happen. And as a college football fan, as a reporter, it sucks. And I could use a lot of other words, but we'll keep this family friendly, but it sucks. And it's a joke. It's a disgrace that this has happened, but hey, that's college football.
The one thing I've wanted to know throughout this is, what are the network's role in the expansion talk? Because obviously, ESPN has total control over under the current contract. Now, if they play this contract all the way out and bring it up to bid, there's been talk about some other networks wanting to be able to get in and be a part of it if it does expand and be able to broadcast some of those games. Have you heard if ESPN is okay with that, or are they pressuring to get this thing done and expanded to where they'll still have exclusive rights? How has that whole thing been working out?
Yeah, I don't think the issue is they haven't even got to that point yet. That's what's, I think, so frustrating for everyone that wants this to happen is, look, if there's a 12-year contract, we have 4 years left of a 14 playoff. If you decide before the 12-year contract is up that you want to extend it, renew it, tweak it, change it, then you have to have an 11-0 unanimous vote by everyone involved to do that. So, and then part of that is ESPN then would be able to have, I guess, exclusive negotiating rights on whatever that new format is. If you want to run the new deal out 12 more years, 2 years, 6 years, whatever. However, Ralph Russo of AP and other reporters have mentioned that if they did decide to do that, which obviously they shut the door on that ESPN would be open to letting multiple networks be part of the bidding process if a playoff started before this current 12-year deal was up. So yeah, they haven't even got to that point. And the other frustrating thing is the many consultants that work for the different conferences have estimated that a 12-team playoff would bring in an additional $450 million in additional revenue. That's the difference financially between a 14 playoff and a 12-team playoff. And for once, which is shocking in college football, money did not matter. Money did not rule the day, because if so, you would have thought they would have got something done just thinking about how much more money they would make with a 12-team playoff. But so now with contract going the full 12 years done, so then when they decide what they're going to do in the new format, whether it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 16, whatever, that will be open to bidding of any media outlet, ESPN, Fox, Amazon, Netflix, your guys' podcast, whoever will all be available to bid for that, and they'll go to the highest bidder. So basically, that will be a big change. But again, from what Ralph Russo and others had reported, ESPN was willing to let others be involved in the bidding process, even if they interrupted the contract. So basically, ESPN would have said, okay, we'll give away our exclusive negotiating rights so we can have a bigger playoff moving forward. But again, we never got to that point to see exactly what would have happened.
Brett, so you mentioned that they essentially leave $450 million on the table, where ESPN would have allowed other networks to come in and bid on maybe expanding this thing under the current contract. Help me understand why, and according to a bunch of different reporters, the Big Ten, the Pac-12, and the ACC, the alliance, were the ones that voted against it. Help me understand why they would do that when they could have brought in that amount of money. I'm confused.
I am too. I can tell you, I can tell you the reasoning. Whether you agree with it or not, that's up to you. The reasoning for the ACC is they felt like that there's too many questions going on in the current landscape of college athletics regarding the future of the NCAA, name, image, and likeness. Also, they had an issue with player safety. By going to a 12-team playoff, some teams may play additional games compared with now. They claimed that their players were not in favor of that. That was their stance. The Big Ten, they wanted the conference champs to get automatic bids in a 12-team format, and then the highest ranked group of 5 conference champ would get a automatic bid, and the remaining 6 bids would go to the highest sixth ranked at large teams. Basically, everyone else except for the ACC and the Pac-12, they're a whole nother category. I'll explain that in a second. But basically, everyone else wanted not the Power 5 conference champs to get an automatic bid, but the top 6 highest ranked conference champs each year to get an automatic bid. 99% of the time, that's going to be the Power 5 champs included in that top 6 conference champions. Now, a couple of years ago, if we would add a 12-team playoff in that format, Oregon was 24th or 25th, and Cincinnati of the American and Coastal Carolina of the Sun Belt had higher ranked conference champs. So if that model was in place back then the Pac-12 would not have got an automatic bid. They wouldn't have gotten a playoff because they would have had nobody ranked high enough to get in a large bid either. The issue with allowing Power 5 conference champs automatic bids is a case of if you've got a number 25 Oregon, why should they be in a 12-team playoff just because they won a Power 5 conference if they're only ranked 25th? But again, you needed a unanimous vote to do that. So that was the Big Ten's holdup. The Pac-12 is, I don't know what they're doing. They put out a release that basically said there were 6 formats that had been discussed: an 8-team playoff, the 12-team playoffs, Power 5 getting automatic bids, Power 5's not getting automatic bids. They said they agreed with all of them. They were not opposed to any of them. However, when the presidents voted, last week, a few days ago, the Pac-12, the Big Ten, and the ACC all voted against the 12-team format. So the Pac-12 put out a statement a couple of weeks ago, and said they were in favor of all of these different formats. Yet when the presidents voted on it, the College Football Playoff Management Committee, made up of a president representing all 10 conferences in Notre Dame, the Pac-12 voted against it. So to be very honest, I don't know what the hell the Pac-12 is doing. They usually do what the Big Ten says. So I guess here's another example. So the Pac-12 is talking out of both sides of their mouth. Those are the reasons. You can decide whether to agree or disagree, who's right or wrong. Bottom line is there's not a right or wrong answer in this. But you would think that these people could come up with an agreement that would work for everybody, but they can't do it. And so what's going to happen now in the future? Well, here's one thing. There's no guarantee that we'll have a playoff in the future because this 12-year deal ends in 4 years. So what happens after that? If there's no new playoff that has been agreed upon by everyone, then there's no playoff. So the biggest question I have, and a lot of people throughout college athletics, is what is going to change now that's going to be different in 2-3 years from now when they have to come to an agreement on what the new format will be? Is the ACC suddenly going to change their mind? Is the Pac-12? Is the Big Ten? It appears doubtful. They've been talking about this model for the past several months, and they could not come to an agreement. Greg Sankey has come out publicly and said, look, guys, when the idea of a 12-team playoff first came up, the SEC was against it. But there were several ADs and presidents within the SEC that was not for a 12-team format. And you can see why. The SEC's done pretty well with the 14 format. They have a team in every year. They have 2 teams in every third or fourth year. They've obviously won the majority of champions have come from the SEC. So Greg Sankey said, look, guys, we decided we would be in favor of the 12-team model because we think that's what's best for everybody overall. But Sankey said, you know what? When we start talking about a new playoff format, when the current one expires, don't assume that we're going to be okay with the 12-team format how it is now. We may change our thinking because, oh, by the way, OU and Texas are coming on board, and they may want to stay at 4. They may want to go to 8. They may want 2. Who knows? The SEC, I don't think this will ever happen, but the SEC and Big Ten is powerful enough where they could just get together and say, hey, let's just have a playoff between the 4 highest-ranked teams from the SEC and the Big Ten, and that'll be a national championship. And everyone would, they would have their different opinions on it, mock it, whatever. But bottom line is you're probably going to get the best team in the country coming out of the SEC or the Big Ten. That's how powerful those 2 leagues are. I don't think that's what they would prefer. But going forward, that's a very real possibility. And one last thing, the ironic thing with not getting this 12-team format done is the 3 conferences that voted against it, other than the Big Ten, are the ones that would have benefited the most from it. The Pac-12 has been in the fewest number of playoffs of all the Power 5 leagues. The ACC obviously had some success with Clemson. Florida State went in the first year, but they've kind of been an afterthought. And here with the 12-team playoff, they're going to be involved in it. Now with the 14 playoff, there's no guarantee. So it's just, again, it's frustrating. You can tell how frustrated I am, and I'm not even involved in the voting or structure of all this stuff. I mean, and another part is, I think, obviously you guys are OU ties. I do believe very strongly, and have people tell me this, fact that OU and Texas happened before the 12-team playoff was officially done, that caused a lot of issues with the Big Ten, with the ACC and the Pac-12, and the Big 12. But you know what? The Big 12 has put all that aside and said we're in favor of a 12-team playoff. I'm not sure if those other leagues have still put that aside, and I think they still hold that against the SEC. And you couple that with the fact that those leagues all have fairly new commissioners, and so that's why now we're stuck at a big cluster.
Well, that builds right into the question I had ready to fire your way. Is there's been this conspiracy theory floating around that the reason the Pac-12, ACC, and Big Ten are voting against the conference expansion is because there's this thought that if you go to a 12-team playoff and you don't do the automatic qualifier, well, then what's to stop the SEC from just acquiring all of the top schools in the country? Because they're starting to get there that way anyways. If you're going to a massive 12-team expansion where you don't have the automatic qualifier, what's to stop the SEC from go ahead and grabbing Florida State and Clemson, or Notre Dame and Ohio State, bringing all these teams in just to have their own conference? And is there any truth to any of that? Have you heard any of that? And that's why these teams are these conferences rather are voting against it?
I mean, maybe some fan bases may think that. I don't think anyone that has any power within college athletics really believes that. Now, that's not saying that may not be the case several years down the road. But look, the Big Ten is going to get a new media rights deal in the next couple of years. They're probably going to bypass what the SEC's making. Mm-hmm. They'll, I'm sure multiple networks will win rights to the Big Ten. CBS, which is losing to ESPN, wants to stay involved with college football. You could argue the Big Ten, although not as successful on the field, has bigger markets, bigger fan bases than the SEC. So the CBS is going to throw a ton of money at the Big Ten. The Big Ten will actually make more money than the SEC. As far as the SEC going to grab Clemson, Florida State, or Notre Dame, the ACC's media rights is through 2034. So we still have 13 years left. So what that means is if a school would leave the ACC, let's say they would leave next year, for the next 10 years, all of their home media right TV revenue would stay with the ACC. So it would not make sense for anybody to leave, even to go to the SEC or go to the Big Ten. Financially, it wouldn't make sense. Now, when we get, 3 or 4 years out from 2034, is that possible? Absolutely. But right now, no way. It's not going to happen. And the other thing is, with Texas and OU, the funny thing is, all of the conferences that, are crying and belly aching about it happening, they all would have taken OU and Texas in a heartbeat. The ACC, the Big Ten, the Pac-12. Heck, the Pac-12 already tried it once. They all would have taken OU and Texas if they would have joined. Heck, the Big Ten, if Notre Dame called them and said, look, we don't care about the granted rights with the ACC, we want to come to the Big Ten. The Big Ten would do it in a heartbeat. They would literally, I'd say they burn the contract of the alliance in a fire, but they actually have no written contract. So I guess there's nothing to deal with there. But it's just so hypocritical that a lot of things that these conferences say as far as the alliance and doing what's right for the good of college football, it's hogwash. Because if they had the chance to add OU and Texas, they all would have done it. If Notre Dame could lead the ACC right now and join the Pac-12, join the Big Ten, join the Big 12, all of those conferences would say absolutely yes. But to your original question, yeah, the schools leaving the ACC, that's not going to happen for at least 10 years. Could that happen down the road? Absolutely. Who knows what we have then? We could have 4 16-team super conferences. We could have 3 24-team super conferences. We could have a NFL type model with 30 to 40 teams playing under kind of the same umbrella, divided up in the different divisions or conferences or whatever they call them. So that's something I think you're on to, but I think that's still, a good 10 years down the road. Could it happen? Absolutely, yes. In the near future, it's very, very doubtful.
Brett, Mike Oresco has been very outspoken over these last couple of months, but with this not getting done, with expansion not getting done now, should the group of 5 be worried that maybe when it comes around in 2026 that they could just get phased out entirely? Is that something you think that could happen, that it could just be a Power 5 playoff and they just leave all those schools behind?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything's possible. I don't think. I think if you gave the commissioner's truth serum, I really don't think they don't want the group of 5 to be part of a playoff, but they're not going to pay them as much. They're not going to get as much revenue from the college football playoff as the Power 5 leagues because they're not worth as much. TV ratings, ticket sales, et cetera, and they currently don't. So whatever the new contract is, if the Power 5 will decide, make a recommendation how it will be split up, and the group of 5 is going to get a big chunk less than the Power 5. And if the group of 5 won't go along with it and say, wait, we deserve more, Cincinnati made the playoff and this or that, the Power 5 will say, either you're in or you're not. You can go do your own playoff. So I don't think they would put the screws to them to exclude him, but certainly I don't think they're going to be. I don't think they're going to give them a great deal. They're not going to overpay for those leagues. And to kind of put it in perspective, and look, I'm afraid we're going to get to that point where the Power 5 splits from the non-Power 5. And I understand that it's changed now with they call them the Autonomy 5, where they kind of make the rules that pertain to them. And because in the past you had the University of Alabama had to operate under the same rules as San Jose State. No offense to San Jose State, but those are 2 different animals, and so you're limiting what Alabama could do as far as size of their staff, different things that would basically handcuff them because not everybody could afford it. Well, we're past that now. But for instance, the SEC revenue numbers they put out last week, each school received about 55 million for the last fiscal year. The Conference USA schools, $1 million a year. School. Now, and think about that. That's crazy. Now look, Saturday, anything can happen. Anybody can beat anybody. But there is no way on the face of this earth that any school or business that's receiving $50 million less than your competition is going to be able to compete against that other business or school 365 days a year. So I think because of that, and look, this is not going to, the group of 5 is not going to narrow the gap. The gap's only going to get bigger and bigger. And I do think of that do think because of that is one reason that we may see them split apart. And, Nick Saban has been very vocal about this. He wants his schedule. He wants to play Power 5 only opponents. He wants it like the NFL. So you don't have to go 12-1 or 13-0 in the SEC to make the playoff. He's fine with playing all Power 5 schools like the NFL. And if you go 9-3 or 8-4, it's based on the strength of your team, power ratings, however they would do it, and you're not penalized. You're not being compared against 13-0 Cincinnati, who played 2 ranked teams, against Alabama, who played 6 or 7. But people are saying, well, Cincinnati needs to be in the playoff over. I know Alabama won the SEC, but if they wouldn't have, they need to be in the playoff because they went undefeated. Well, yeah, they went undefeated. They only played 2 ranked teams. And so I think part of a combination of those reasons are why the Power 5, I believe, somehow will split from the Group 5. And look, I know it sounds like I'm pounding the Power 5's drum right now. I don't like it. I don't think it's good for college athletics. I think college athletics is going to end up being like the NFL, and I don't like that. But I'm afraid that's where we're headed. And conference realignment with Nebraska going to the Big Ten and, all the other dominoes that followed, I think that's unfortunately what we're headed towards. The question is now, when are we going to get there? Is it in 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, or 10 years? But it's kind of like, I know you guys, aren't that old, but I know you guys probably remember we used to have the WAC conference. I mean, the Conference USA could be gone in a couple of years. Who knows? Look, they're not going to win a national championship. Probably never. Not probably, but they won't. But I don't think that's good to just these conferences just totally going away. But that's kind of the result of kind of what all is going on with college athletics. And like I said, the gap's only going to get bigger between these power schools and non-power schools.
Well, I personally believe that the Group of 5 are dumb for not having their own playoff and doing it the right way, doing it like a legitimate playoff, and they would make a lot of money off of that. I think there's some really good teams there. I think it would be a great product, and I think a lot of people would watch it. Instead, they're happy to just be drug along with the big boys just so they can get a couple of scraps handed out every now and then. I personally think that's a ridiculous business model. No one's ever going to win anything. You're just kind of there. But
you know what? I actually a few years ago, I actually wrote. I believe I think it was before I got to ESPN. I was at CBS Sports, so it's probably been 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 years ago. I actually did some reporting on that, and there were some people within the Group 5 that wanted their own playoff.
They should.
But
right now, all they are is a bunch of glorified practice dummies. They can't do anything.
It's like the NIT tournament and the NCAA. You're absolutely right. The problem is, privately, they would tell me that. Nobody would go on the record, because when you do that, you're admitting you're not as good as the Power 5. But you don't want to admit that. It would kill recruiting, supposedly. It would kill fan interest, a number of other things, to basically admit you weren't on the same level. I do believe Group 5 can beat Power 5 teams on any given weekend, but I don't believe that a Group 5 can compete with that same playing a Power 5 school every week and have the same amount of success. The thing is, to Power in the well, if you do that, if you force the Group 5 out of the playoff, there's going to be a lawsuit. They're going to get called before Congress, et cetera, et cetera. The money's a big difference. I had Power 5 ADs tell me that if the Group of 5 approached them about wanting to do their own playoff, in other words, it's one thing if they come to the Power 5 and say, hey, you know what, guys, we want to do our own playoff. That's totally different than the Power 5 saying, you know what, you're not going to be part of our playoff. The Power 5 ADs told me that they were pretty confident that the Power 5 would actually pay the group of five not to be a part of their playoff. It would make it financially worth their while part of the playoff, and to figure out how to do that. But again, nobody within the group of five will admit to that publicly. And a perfect example, and I just thought of this, I really like this guy, so I'm not picking on him. But Danny White, when he was at UCF, whenever he would talk about scheduling non-conference games, he says, well, we deserve a home and home. We're going to do a home with Power Fives. We're going to do home and home. Whoever we play, it's home and home, whether it's a Group 5 or a Power 5. Well, he, didn't have a lot of luck getting Power 5 home and homes because of obviously the disparity between the Power 5 and the Group 5. Danny White's now the AD at Tennessee. How many home and homes is Tennessee doing with Group 5s? I don't have their schedule in front of me, but I think it's none. Why? Well, it's different now. He's now part of the Power 5. So his mindset has changed. But I agree with you. I think they should have their own playoffs. I think there should be some kind of way, and you could set it up this way, where if you have a team like Cincinnati that is voted amongst the top 4 teams overall, then they would get a bid to the big boy playoff, if you will. And if nobody qualifies for that, then they just have their own playoff. I think it would be big television wise. Like you said, you could incorporate the bowl games. You could do a number of different things, play it on campus, whatever you wanted to do. The problem is it's not going to happen until the Power 5 officially splits from the Group 5. Then I think you'll finally see it happen. But unfortunately, I don't think you'll see them do that on their own, just because of, all the reasons we mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was going to say is, and tell me if you think I'm wrong on this, when there's $450 million to be made and nobody has to do anything extra to get it, it's going to happen. Like, is this just not some serious posturing here? Is that not what we're witnessing? I've never seen a negotiation before where there's $500 million. Nobody has to do anything extra. No one. They don't have to do anything. You don't have to work more hours. You don't have to put anything of your own on the table. We all just say yes and split the $500 million. Like, that never gets shut down, right?
It did this time. The college football came out Friday and said, we are not expanding for the remainder of the contract. And, look, they can always come back and say, hey, last minute we figured this out. But they have said there will be no expansion. The 12-year contract will run its course as a 14 playoff. This year is year 9. We'll have 4 more years, including this year, and then we'll figure out what to do next. So they have said it's done, it's over with. We're moving on, trying to figure out what we're going to do in 2026. Because the only way it can change is if all the conferences that don't want the Power 5 automatic bids would have to change their mind, which ain't happening, or the Big Ten, ACC, and Pac-12 would have to change their mind, which they've given no indication that that's going to happen either. You make a great point. There would be an additional two games for teams that made it to the final, or if a team that didn't get a first round bye ran the table, they would have a couple extra games. But there's already been talk about possibly changing some of the game rules. So, you don't stop a clock on an incomplete pass, or you keep the clock running on first downs, or different. So there's fewer plays in games. So that would kind of shrink the number of plays, each player would experience through a year. So they're kind of working on ways to tweak that because of an expanded schedule. But yeah, you're right. It's mind boggling. Here's, $450 million, and all you have to do is agree on this, which everyone says they want to expand. They just can't come to an agreement on how that format will be. And so, yeah, we're stuck with 4 teams. And the funny thing is, look, a 12-team playoff would be great because you would when we get to right now, we get to October, and like the number of playoff teams has been reduced from it's probably starts at 10 before the season. You know, you can pick 10 teams and say, okay, here's your playoff field. Maybe there's an outlier like Michigan this year came out of nowhere. They weren't ranked in the preseason. But for the most part, you know who they are. By the time we get to October, we're down to like 6, maybe 8 teams. If you've got a 12-team playoff, we're going into mid-November, and you're going to have more than 20 teams that can get into the playoff either as an at-large or either by winning their conference. You're going to have more people invested. You're going to have more fan bases invested. But now it's going to go back to 4 teams. And kind of like Major League Baseball. I don't know if you guys are baseball fans. I'm not. But one thing I hate about Major League Baseball is, after 1/8 of the season, whether your team has a shot to make the play, they've either been eliminated or they have no shot. It's the same way. Look, a 12-team playoff doesn't mean Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Oklahoma. The usual suspects aren't going to be Georgia. Are not going to be in the Final Four, but you're going to have some different teams that get in the mix. Maybe somebody can pull off an upset. The bottom line, I just think it's better for college football when you have more programs engaged that have a chance to get in the playoff. Because right now, there's 100 with James Madison making the move. There's 131 teams that play FBS football. That number is going to go up when we have a couple of FCS teams make the move to Conference USA. So basically, you're almost 1%, 2% of teams can go to the playoff. It's the smallest percentage in any sport by a large number, and I don't think that's good for college football.
Brett, we love this silly sport. There's no doubt. But this news, you didn't make me feel any better about it, man. But we appreciate the time, man. It's always fun catching up, and congratulations on your Cowboys' successful season. It hurt me to say that, but congratulations.
You know what? Thank you, but 17 plays inside the 10-yard line and 1 touchdown. And I really believe, and I'm not, people believe it or not, I'm not being a homer. I really think if Oklahoma State wins that game, they get in the playoff. I'm talking about Baylor because of the disparity of the wins versus ranked teams, the tougher schedule, all that stuff. That's what made. And you know what? People have said, well, how would you have felt if Oklahoma State won that game and didn't get in the playoff? I said I would have felt a hell of a lot better than them losing the game and not getting in the playoff. But it was a nice ending. I'm back in the Fiesta Bowl. It's fun to hear OU fans say wait till next year. Doesn't happen often, but I love hearing that. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
I'm sure you do, man. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy.